there's a great course on the history of science fiction authors. And, of course, they go all the way back, and you talk about all of the incredible authors, even starting with the pulp magazines and guys writing, these short stories and stuff. And which is how we get like the Hugo Awards, for instance.
Right.
And, their impact on this genre, and how today's authors, it's kind of like music or anything else. They're inspired by what they knew as kids and what they chose to read and listen to growing up. And, you don't have, you don't have Prince without the music of the 40s and the 50s, right? But
Right.
Prince doesn't sound anything like the 40s and the 50s, and when David Bowie's another perfect example, right? So in the book world and dealing with authors, we have excellent masters of science fiction, whether it's Arthur C. Clarke or
Isaac Asimov, H.G.
yes,
Wells,
or
even Ray Bradbury, and even our favorite Scientologist.
yes, and of course Philip K. Dick. I mean, you don't have the authors today without those leaders, and
Right.
some of them going back to, it's kind of like you don't have fantasy today without Tolkien.
Absolutely.
I mean, so
And you don't have epics without Frank Herbert.
right. I mean, and even Herbert was influenced by by somebody else, right?
Right.
So and all of this probably goes back to the Bible at some point in cuneiform writings before that or whatever.
Well,
But
I would venture to say it actually probably goes back to mythology, because mythology majority of mythology is stories that were passed down and were embellished and you know became gods, and so I think that is like, in all cultures there's a development of deities, and the stories that are told, somebody had to start the story, and then after the story is passed time and time again, and then the belief in the previous story then leads them to see something, which then adds to the whole conglomeration of myths. So I think when you get into because a lot of people, societies need to have a past, an explanation of where they came from. And so I think a lot of that is mythology is what created that, the storytelling. Plus, because majority of people didn't write things down, there was not every culture had a form of written language. I mean, most of it was spoken. So um, the passing down of their history, if you will, or their faiths, were done through stories. And I think the closest for us would be through Native Americans, and so or Egyptians, where it wasn't a written language; it was pictures. So I think you get that. That's more the influence you get as to why we have fiction in the way we do, or fiction that feels real. You know, because I think that fiction, the best sell of a fiction book is one that mixes in reality. You know, um, and I think science fiction, the best kind of science fiction is the one that is somewhat grounded, where everything isn't so incredible that you just can't believe it. You know, where there's limitations on most things have limitations. You know, what the people can and can't do. And this book, one of the greatest things about this series, I said it's a book, but one of the greatest things about this series is you find out how other people on other worlds, um, how they've had to deal with and how they've grown up, you know, and expanded their societies and things that have happened to them and how they've had to evolve based on where they're living. I mean, you have a planet that they're terraforming, so they all live under glass domes, or not necessarily glass, but under domes in various, you know, ways that are set up. But there are areas that they have to wear breath masks, you know, breathing masks. And the reality in that is like, you know, it keeps that grounded level. So it's not just high fantasy and, you know, just crazy, you know, unbelievable stuff. And I think that she does such a great job with keeping the realities or keeping the, um, you know, this is how it is, because it has to be relevant within her stories. And so I really enjoy that. And I think that her style of doing that probably influenced a lot of people on keeping their stories somewhat grounded. You know,
Yep.
like Gravity. Gravity, so I think probably one of the best examples of that, aside from that, the whole air mask, is there's a certain race of humans that were genetically modified. They don't have legs. And so, in order for that society to thrive and function, they have four arms. And so they function through zero G. So there are parts of the planet that are have gravity, and then there are parts of the planet that maintain a zero G. And so when they're not on zero G, they have to use floater cars, you know, or chairs that are the floaters. I mean, to take that detail and keep that in mind, because the sanitary, I mean, I'm just thinking because I'm a sanitary person, you know, germ guy. Um, Walking on your hands, using two of those hands to walk, I just don't see how that would come across as being an acceptable thing in society. Like when you watch Old Boy in Star Wars, Episode One, where he's, you know, was it Bulba or whatever his name is, Sebulba? He's walking
Yeah.
on his hands. I mean, there's a level of dirtiness there. But and since these are fellow humans, just genetically modified, they're still going to have that forefront of, you know, be it cultural, you know, or whatever. There's certain things you don't just overlook, and I think it's great the way that she developed that because, or she included that because the way that she did it really allowed you to have that understanding of how foreign people, like when I was in Iraq, I would definitely you would see there were certain customs and courtesies that you didn't do or that you did do because of how things are. And it's a real situation that you have to deal with. And so you've got somebody from Barry R who is so totally cut off, and then they're coming here to a new place and introduced to this new version of people, and then understanding and being able to do the cultural, you know, meet in the middle kind of deal. I think that she does such a great job of keeping those nuances there. That, and I think so it feels real. I mean, it's plausible. So many parts of it are plausible, given the, you know, the scenarios, that I don't feel like I'm reading something that is just way out there. You know.
Plus, she is really good um, at the comedy of things. I mean,
Yeah.
none of it is over the top. It's not stressed or strained. It's very natural. And, I mean, it just, there's so many aspects of this series that I totally love about it.
Subtle sarcasm.
Yeah, this series, so much more so than so much of the crap that's on television today, deserves it being turned into a TV series. You could not do a movie that would even cover one of the books, I don't think. And I
No, the
think,
cost and the
but
majority of it would have to be CGI'd.
we're never going to see this
No.
made into a TV series simply because it would be on a financial scale of Game of Thrones, and I don't think any studio is willing to spend that kind of money on something at this point.
Well, and a great
I think
example of
those
that is
days are
Old Man's
done.
War.
Yeah.
Sci-fi was going to do Old Man's War, and when you start to get in to realize what it's going to cost or what it's going to take, you were talking Mandalorian level, creating new ways to do things, or Star Wars levels where George Lucas is creating absolutely new ways to film and get things done for special effects. When you get to that level, I mean, even I guess what a workshop over in New Zealand just to develop Lord of the Rings. You know, Peter Jackson, he knew you couldn't just film this regular,
Yeah.
but you have to do credit to the author. You know, because again, it's a respect they deserve, but it's also if you really want people to understand the story and feel the story, then you have to go to that next level. I mean,
Well,
I don't think you could.
it's like the decision to make Fallout into a TV series, or Silo, into a TV series,
Right.
and um,
But I think both of those have a world level that is easy to reproduce or
manageable.
easier. Yeah, it's more
Yes,
manageable to
yes,
reproduce.
yes. I mean,
Whereas,
well, Silo is
yeah,
pretty much everything inside a
right. But
silo, but
whereas you've got on the scale of Old Man's War and this, uh, I don't think I think it's so far there's so much that you would have to do to make it possible that I think that the cost would way outweigh I think what the draw would initially be. It's not well known enough, and I think that in this day and age, people want something the new, what's new, you know, and
well,
looking
that
back
that
and
that's
saying,
the problem, though. I mean, I think that they should be taking properties like this and
"Well, I agree."
turning them into series to bring in new people, because you
Well, look
okay.
how big of a mistake it was when they try to make um, L. Ron Hubbard's book into a live action. I mean, you had A-list celebrities, and it was so bad that you know to this day is considered one of the worst movies ever.
Well, I think part of the so cautionary tale to authors: maintain creative control over your fucking shit if it's going to be built into a series.
The
And
Witcher.
Silo is a perfect
That's
example
all I'm
of
gonna say.
where
The Witcher.
right, exactly. Silo is a perfect example of where it is a collaboration, you know, and with Hugh Howey, and they've done a phenomenal job with that series. I mean, that is a home run for Apple. And
And I would say the same thing with Peter Jackson with his Tolkien estate, his son, the actual people to be able to bring to you a story but stay true to the author's vision.
yes,
And I thought that was
well,
great.
but I guarantee you there's a large segment of the uh, Tolkien community out there that do not like the Rings of Power, and I think the Rings of Power is great. I love it.
Well, we'll save that for a different discussion because that in itself needs a whole different discussion. Because
All right,
I have a very different belief on that.
Okay. So,
But yeah,
but the problem is that for um, shit, what was the movie with the um, Invasion Earth? No, they
Battlefield
all
Earth. Battlefield
Battlefield
Earth.
Earth. Yes, Battlefield Earth. Which I have not read any of L. Ron Hubbard's books. So I tried to start Battlefield Earth or whatever book it's based off of. I think it is
No, it's
called
Battlefield
Battle.
Earth. Yeah, that's what it's called.
Um, but the Scientology thing just kept throwing me off. And and I'm Catholic. I don't need to be indoctrinated by anybody else. So uh, you know, I I love exploring new ideas, new concepts, new religions, new belief systems. Um, hell, one of my favorite episodes of Babylon 5 is where at the very end, and it takes place in season 1, where the commander of Babylon 5, a space station, is introducing uh, Delenn, the leader of the Membari delegation, and a couple of other people to all of these representatives of different religions on Earth in this long row. And that's how the episode ends. And he's like, this is Rabbi so and so, and this is Father so and so, and this is Dalai Lama so and so, and just going down the row of all of these, just showing how diverse just Earth is, in this grand scheme of galactic view. And so, and uh, the TV writers, especially when they're creating their own series, whether it's Ronald Moore or um, uh, J. Michael Stransky or whoever, if they're the primary for that series, you get the continuity and you get the dedication throughout the series. It's kind of like
Joss Whedon, the good example.
yes, and so you don't have to worry about somebody coming in and throwing that wrench into that fucking machine, right? Um, Battlestar Galactica is a perfect example. Um, and I would argue that there were some decisions made with the final season that I didn't like, but overall, as a kid that grew up watching the original Battlestar Galactica when it aired, I mean, I was glued to the TV every Friday night or Saturday night. I don't remember which night it was on. And I loved, Starbuck and Apollo jumping into their Vipers and going and blasting Cylons and, just so much of that series. And if you go back and watch it now, it's so campy, it's hard to watch. But when they announced that they were going to remake Battlestar Galactica, I was excited at first, and then I was kind of pissed because you don't mess with Starbuck and Apollo.
No,
And
you
then when
make him
they
a woman.
announced that Starbuck was going to be a female, I was on the side that was like, no, negative, And I watched that the mini series pilot, and I was blown the fuck
Razor's
away.
Edge.
I mean, Cylons that look like us totally blew my mind, and that anybody could be a Cylon, holy cow! And where they took it in so much more of an adult and darker theme, but that there was light at the end of that tunnel. The character development throughout the seasons, the the special effects, the amount of energy that they put into building the sets, and the technology and everything, and it was just the right amount of homage to the original series. Like you even had some of the Mark One Cylons, on display in the Galactica when they were getting ready to mothball it in the first pilot episode and stuff. And they did everything right to build that series. And detractors of that series because they liked the original Battlestar Galactica are just fucking idiots. Because that is a masterclass of how you take something that was old and make it new again and make it exciting for the current generation. This is the problem with Star Wars today. George Lucas and even Disney keep pandering to 10-year-olds. When the 10-year-olds that watch the original trilogy, we want Star Wars to grow up with us. And Rogue One is a perfect example of how that happened. But everything else, with the exception of maybe Andor, has been this. I get that they want to keep bringing in new generations of kids, but the prequels were just absolute garbage. Yes, there are some redeeming things in each one of the prequels. But that battle between Vader or Anakin and Obi-Wan Kenobi was supposed to be epic. Epic. And I mean, that was like in 77, after I went and saw that movie probably 100 fucking times when it came out, because I kept sneaking into the theater and watching it again and kept sneaking into the theater and watching it again. All of the talk, and of course you didn't have your social media and your talk at that point was with your friends, where they read something in some magazine or something that Darth Vader was the way he was because he fell into a volcano. That was the rumor, right? And that the stormtroopers were clones. All of these kinds of things. And there's this constant reference to this war that happened before, the Clone War. It's kind of like when we were reading Galaxy's Edge and they kept talking about the Savage Wars.
Right.
And I was like, man, I really want a book series on the Savage Wars. I want to know what the hell happened in the Savage Wars. And we got it. And your mind broke. Your mind
dream
broke.
Fulfilled. Oh, and it was, and actually the great thing about that is when they did deliver it, they delivered it beyond what my expectations.
Yes. And nothing, no, not even close. I mean,
well, and the same thing. You get a character. Like, here's a great example of having expectations and either meeting your hero and finding out they're a piece of shit, or meeting your hero and finding out they're everything you wanted them to be and more. Like, mind blown. And so those of us that were Star Wars kids, we see in Empire Strikes Back, we see a brief moment of this bounty hunter named Boba Fett. Nobody knows anything about him, which is funny because if you actually read the history of all of it and you get back to it, he was actually the bad guy for all of Star Wars. It just changed. But he was introduced when the very first characters of Star Wars were introduced before the movies even came out. He was the all-white guy in a parade. You go forward, and we see him die in a very miserable, and I mean, he went out like a bitch. All right. Not only did he get thrown into the side of a sand barge, but he did the Wilhelm scream, which to me is probably one of the worst ways you can do a character that has that that toughness to him,
the potential.
Yes. And so, of course, with the expanded universe and getting the development of this character that makes him not just a guy that was standing in a group of bounty hunters, not just the guy that took Captain Solo in Carbonite Freeze and delivered him to Jabba. No, he is this world or this bounty hunter known throughout the universe as being the guy. You pay him, he delivers. No questions asked. And so you get that development. And then we get the idea, we get this series called Mandalorian. And it was great because even though Boba Fett wasn't a Mandalorian, he represented a race that had those beliefs. And then you get to see the purest version of that race. And so you get that. But then we're rewarded. Disney says we're going to make a series, The Book of Boba Fett. And of course, we're like, well, when and where and how? Is this going to be like pre Jedi? Is this going to be like pre Empire? I mean, what are we talking about here? Are we going to see from how he starts and goes on? And then what we get is we get a guy who was partially digested by a Sarlacc, somehow was pulled from that, and then in turn goes back to Mos Eisley and takes over. But it's such a hollow and surface level character that he's just as you know him just as well at the end of the Book of Boba Fett season 1 as you did in the movies.
Yep.
Because you don't get to know who he is. You don't really, and because Disney and Kathleen Kennedy, who have destroyed Star Wars, I mean, collapsed it on itself, stomped on it, and ruined it, and made it undesirable to even look into the future of. They took and destroyed, and basically the expanded universe was just trash, gone. Years and years and years of amazing, talented authors writing books that George Lucas approved, and Disney shits them out the door. And
Yeah, and so for any
to,
before you go any further, for any viewer that is interested, I highly recommend the Darth Bane trilogy.
Amazing, best
Probably the
anyone.
best Star Wars books out there.
Absolutely.
And that is coming from somebody that has read close to 100 Star Wars books.
Yes,
Darth
absolutely.
Bane, and it takes place in at a time that we have not seen in the Star Wars universe as far as on screen. That
And it
the old
explains,
Republic, where we kind of hint at it in video games and stuff, but
but it
this is the
also
heyday
explains
where there was schools of Sith and schools of Jedi around the galaxy, and they
and
had
again,
different orders and stuff
they
like
took this from
monks.
the
I
Bane
mean,
series because
this is
when
the
they wrote the
heyday
books, it was long
of
before episode 1 was
that
ever
universe, in my opinion,
brought out,
and
or
that
episode 2.
trilogy
You
is
know,
excellent. Mm-hmm.
when they spot Darth Maul as a Sith, and he tells them there's always a master and there's always apprentice, never more than 2. But they don't explain to you why. And it's never explained. However, this book series is 3 books. Not only do they give you an understanding of why it's that way, but it gives you the development of basically what Star Wars becomes.
Yep.
And so I think it's a very important book in terms of that. But back to the whole problem is that because they got rid of this expanded universe, well, you then delete this guy's history, and so you're back to only the canon, what they consider to be canon, which is the the 6 or the 9 theatrical makings of Star Wars. And so you have somebody who is in charge of all this, and her excuse is we have no material. We have no material to draw from. And yet you have hundreds and hundreds of books and
Red
comics
Threat.
and just I mean that you
There's
could
so many books that they could do that would just flip the
right.
Star Wars world upside down.
So
And
what you get is hollow characters.
yeah,
And so of course it's a wasted season. And
yeah.
then of course you get what do they bring in? They bring in the Mandalorian. Well, the Mandalorian's already got his fame because that's a phenomenal series. And it basically